Just by way of review, when the church selects the readings for Sunday Mass, there is an intention behind the selection of the first reading from the Old Testament and the Gospel for the day. They are paired together. The second reading, which usually comes from one of the letters of St. Paul, is read as a series. And so you begin, for example, his letter to the Romans, and each Sunday we hear a portion until the letter is complete. And if there's any relationship to the gospel, it's purely coincidental. It's always the first reading from the Old Testament and the gospel that we need to endeavor to find the intention and what the relationship between the two is. And I say all this because I would imagine that someone has a question. What on earth does a widow have to do with Joshua going to battle against the Amalekites? Well, that remains to be seen. And if I answer that question satisfactorily, that would be purely an accident. But let's look at that first reading from the 18th chapter of the book of Exodus. The first thing we have to do is kind of like step back and put the battle against the Amalekites in its context. And so we do this by interpreting the book of Exodus in terms of typology, what it is that it is revealing and foreshadowing. This is how the fathers of the church approached the sacred scriptures, especially the many narratives in the Old Testament. And so we start by looking at the Israelites living in slavery in the land of Egypt, under the bondage and the tyranny of Pharaoh. And through a variety of signs and wonders, God delivered his people from that state of slavery. And in their escape, they passed through the Red Sea, which we readily identify as being a type of baptism. And then once baptized in the sea, they passed into the desert, and there they were confronted by their enemies. In this case, the Amalekites. And this is deeply suggestive of the Christian life. That through the sacrament of holy baptism, we were freed from slavery to sin and the bondage and the tyranny of the devil. But being thus washed and being delivered does not mean that life is going to be easy. Jesus Christ has been very clear about that. If you wish to be my disciple, you must deny yourself each day, take up your cross, and follow me. In essence, our Christian life, our interior life, our life of prayer is one of constant warfare. It is a battle. Just like Pharaoh was not going to let the Israelites off that easy, despite all the signs and wonders he saw, pursued them nonetheless. And we are always harassed and harangued by the dark spirits. Not to mention our constant daily battle against sin and temptation, and then all the other variety of adversities we encounter each day. The little Amalekites that present themselves in our life. They all need to be overcome. The next point that I want to make is the one that is subtle. It's found in one of those details that's easy to overlook. And it's this. How did Joshua defeat the Amalekites? Did it have anything to do with his military skill? No, it did not. We are plainly told that Joshua obtained victory in his battle precisely because of the prayer of Moses. It was because Moses prayed that Joshua was able to defeat their enemies. And that's a point well worth pondering. Because it does happen. When we're approached by the devil and his innumerable deceptions, when we're confronted with sin and habits of sin, when we're bedeviled by innumerable temptations, and we see all of the adversities and the trials and the difficulties that we must overcome, we have this tendency to rely on our skill. We tend to rely on our own resources. I can do this. But I have the unfortunate task of standing up in front of all of you and saying, no, you can't. You cannot. And it drives home the importance and the necessity of prayer. Because it is only the grace of God working within us and through us, in and through other people, and any other instrument that God has at his disposal, that he will place, as it were, in our service to bring about and complete his will for us, and to give us the victory that we desire. But it all begins with prayer. It simply is not optional. But you know that already. The third point that I would like to make is the one that perhaps is the most obvious. When Moses sends Joshua into the plain to confront the Amalekites in battle, he tells him, "And I will go up on the hill, and there I will pray." But how did he pray? Interestingly enough, with his arms outstretched. And the Father saw in this a clear image of Jesus Christ crucified. And it is in Jesus Christ crucified that we see and recognize our warrior king. He's a warrior. He has fought the battle and continues to fight the battle for us. I believe it's in the book of Deuteronomy where the Lord says, all you have to do is be still. Still. But Jesus Christ does not go to war against his enemies and ours with traditional military armaments. He defeats the devil and his minions. He conquers sin and death with his humility, his patience, his charity, and his eagerness to conform his will to the will of his Father and to bring it to completion. For our part, we simply need to appropriate that victory, appropriate that grace. Trusting, leaning hard into the goodness and the mercy of God. So now we come back to the poor widow. Her predicament is not unlike ours. She's surrounded round about by her adversaries, isn't she? I mean, in a perfect world, you think that a widow who is suffering some form of injustice and goes to the judge might find a remedy for her problem. But what is she confronted with? The very judge from whom she should expect justice becomes another adversary, another obstacle she has to overcome. And how did she overcome him? Well, you already know. She nagged him to death. Nagged him. And what does Jesus Christ say in response to this curious parable? He says, pay attention to that dishonest judge. And if a widow can nag him to death in order to get the good thing she desires, how much more will your good and gracious God give you what your heart's desire? And so he deeply impresses upon us the importance, the necessity to persevere in our prayer. But to do so, we have to understand it in terms of prayer being an expression of the fire of devotion that burns within our heart. And the only way to keep that fire of devotion burning in our heart is to feed it with the wood of the cross that we have to pick up each day and carry as we follow in the footsteps of Jesus Christ. On one occasion, the Lord told his disciples, I am the vine, you are the branches. Just as no branch can bear fruit on its own unless it remains in the vine, so you neither can bear fruit apart from me. I am the vine. You are the branches. Remain in me, he says, as my word remains in you. Because in this your Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit. Remain in me as I remain in you. Have confidence then. Trust deeply in the goodness and mercy of God.